Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a real puzzle coming out of Colombia's economy. On the one hand, things look pretty good. But on the other, why is borrowing money still so expensive? Let's figure it out.
So this number right here, this is what it's all about. 9.25%. That's the key interest rate from Colombia's central bank, the Banco de la República. And believe me, that number touches everything, from your credit card bill all the way to a business loan for a new factory. So yeah, it's a big deal. Let's really get into it.
And that really is the central question, isn't it? I mean, with an economy that seems to be firing on all cylinders, why isn't it getting any cheaper to borrow money? You'd think, right, that when things are looking this good, the central bank would want to make borrowing easier, to pour a little more fuel on the fire, but nope, that is not what's going on.
Okay, so to really wrap our heads around this, let's start with the good stuff. Let's look at all the green lights, all the reasons you'd logically expect the central bank to say, hey, let's cut rates and give everyone a bit of a break.
And look, this isn't just some rosy picture painted by outsiders. The central bank itself is pointing to a ton of positive signs. Their own reports are highlighting just how strong things are looking. And what's so striking is just how widespread this good news is. I mean, it's not just one isolated metric. You got GDP growing at a healthy 2.5%, you see domestic demand getting stronger, people are out there spending, businesses are finally investing again in things like machinery, and maybe the biggest one of all, unemployment has dropped to historic lows. You just can't argue with these numbers. They are all flashing green.
And get this isn't just good for Colombia, it's actually outpacing the average of some other countries in Latin America. So the economic engine is humming along nicely. And with all this great news, the obvious next step would be for the central bank to feel pretty confident, right? Maybe even ease up a bit? Well, not so fast.
Because there is a major problem lurking in the background. It's this one stubborn shadow that's being cast over all of that fantastic economic news. And that problem, I'm sure you've guessed it, is inflation.
And this really gets to the heart of the whole dilemma. The central bank's goal, their target, is 3% inflation, nice and stable. But where are we actually? 5.1%. And that's not just a little bit over the line. It's way off target, and it's proving to be incredibly sticky. But here's the thing. The bank isn't just worried about today's number. They're playing chess, not checkers. They're looking down the road, and they see some pretty major risks on the horizon that could send inflation shooting up again, which would just undo all the progress they've made.
So, what are they worried about? Well, they've got their eyes on three big things. First, you've got food and energy prices, which are just all over the place, totally unpredictable. Second, there's the possibility of a big hike in the minimum wage. And third, you've got this growing government deficit, which is basically just injecting more and more cash into the system.
And they are not mincing words on this. This is a direct quote. They're basically saying, hey, a big sudden jump in the minimum wage could be like pouring gasoline on this inflation fire. It would have, quote, significant inflationary effects. They're putting everyone on notice.
So all of this leads to a really tough decision for the central bank. And honestly, it's a classic balancing act, the kind of thing central bankers everywhere have to wrestle with constantly. So let's just lay it all out. On one side of the scale, you've got all that great news. Strong GDP growth, record low unemployment, recovering investment. That's the argument for a rate cut. Keep the party going. But on the other side of the scale, you have inflation that's just stuck way too high, plus the risk of wage hikes and volatile energy prices. And that's the argument for holding rates steady to keep things from overheating. And in the end, the bank's board had to make a call. And they did. For now, they're choosing caution. They've decided that the risk of runaway inflation is just too great. It outweighs the need to give an extra push to an economy that's, frankly, already doing pretty well on its own.
It really is like driving a car with 2 feet. You've got one foot on the accelerator, that's the economic growth, and you've got the other foot hovering over the brake, that's inflation. They have to tap that brake just enough to keep their speed in check, but without slamming on it and stalling the whole engine.
Okay, but wait, there's more. As if that wasn't complicated enough, there's another huge piece to this puzzle, and this one has to do with the government's own checkbook. 7.6%. That's the government's fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP. Now, that is a big number. What it means, in simple terms, is that the government is spending way more than it brings in through taxes. And to cover that gap, it has to borrow. A lot. And all of that government borrowing creates a classic economic headache called crowding out. It sounds a bit technical, but what does it actually mean for a regular person or a small business that needs a loan?
Well, think about it like this. There's only so much money out there to be loaned out. Now, when the government, which is a huge and very safe borrower, jumps into that pool, well, it soaks up a lot of the available cash. That creates more competition for what's left, which can drive up interest rates and make it harder for everyone else, private businesses, you, me, to get the loans we need to invest and grow.
And this isn't just a textbook theory, folks. It's really happening. The data shows that banks are already shifting their money. They're buying up more government debt because it's a super safe bet, instead of lending that money out to the private sector. So the crowding out is already underway.
Which leaves us with this final, really tricky question. With the government also in the mix, borrowing heavily and adding its own fuel to the fire, the central bank's job gets even harder. How in the world can they tame inflation without having to crank up interest rates so high that they completely stall out that impressive economic growth we talked about? Now that is the tightrope Colombia is walking right now.